Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Um, my name is Michelle Venegas Matula. Buenas tardes, buenos días, hola, wherever you're coming in from. I use she and ella pronouns, and I am the Texas UU Justice Ministry Acting Director as well
All
as
right, I need to go throw
Congregational
this
and
away from
Justice Organizer. So if we can have folks mute for now, um, we would really appreciate it so that we are recording this. There were several folks that really wanted to be here, and unfortunately their schedule wasn't going to allow it. So we are recording so we can send this out. So thank you so much for muting yourselves while we're recording. Today we have the great honor to have Dean Spade with us to talk to us about mutual aid. What does that look like? What does it mean? So we're excited to welcome Dean. Also joining us today is our part of our Texas UU Justice Ministry team. We have Reverend Carrie Holly Hurt, who is our sabbatical minister, while our executive director is on sabbatical. Reverend Erin Walter will be coming back in January, so we'll be seeing her soon. And we also have Taylor Huntley, who is our North Texas organizer, as well as our sacred facilitator for reproductive justice. Um, I was going to ask, can we stop sharing the slides for now? We also have Ethan Deichler, who is our tech help today. So just want to give a shout out to all of those on our team and a big thank you. I also wanted to thank Miss Thornton, who is our TXUUJM intern minister, but is out on medical leave right now. And that actually helped create our toolkits for those that are having in-person events. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. I know there's several groups joining us. We got people from all over. I know there's some groups not just here in Texas, but groups in Florida, groups in Tennessee, in other places. So if you would like, please put in your name, your pronouns if you'd like to share them, and where you're joining us from in the chat. While we are a Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry, I know not all of those joining us today are UUs. So in case you're not familiar with our organization, I just want to tell you a little bit about us. So like I said, we're Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry. It's a long word. To shorten it, we typically use TXUUJM, and we're a statewide organization dedicated to educating and organizing Unitarian Universalists, or sometimes we go by UUs, and friends that share similar values to serve as a bold, progressive faith voice in the public square. So we're grounded in shared values of pluralism, equity, and justice, centered in love. And we work in solidarity with our frontline partners, working together to affect systemic change within Texas legislature and as well as our local communities. So we strive to create a Texas and beyond where all people are treated with dignity, compassion, and respect. And one of our sayings is that we are bending Texas towards justice together. Part of UU tradition is that we open up with a chalice lighting. So I would like to pass it to Reverend Carrie for our chalice lighting.
I'm going to light the chalice with these words that Bess Thornton wrote us. We light this chalice in the name of our interdependence. May this flame release us from the illusion of alienation that keeps us separate. May we come to understand the truth of our inherent interconnectedness, and may we hold that truth through action of solidarity, care, justice, and love.
Like I was mentioning, this is part of our UU tradition, just to open up our sacred space, knowing that justice work is a sacred work. So now for what we have all been waiting for. We know in this time with what's been going on with our government, our systems, whether it's been because of man-made disasters or natural disasters, we are seeing systems failing. And we need to figure out how to rely on each other, how to come together in solidarity, and be able to not just survive, but thrive together in collective care. And part of how we do this is through mutual aid. And we know that word has been getting thrown around a lot, especially with what happened with the SNAP benefits with our government, with the federal government shutting down and people not getting their paychecks, um, and so much more that's been going on. Um, and so to help guide us and to learn more about mutual aid and what that really means, I invite Dean Spade to be our guest speaker. Dean has been working to build queer and trans liberation and end policing, border enforcement, and war for the past 25 years. He is the author of Normal Life, Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and the Limits of the Law, and Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next. He's also the director of Pinkwashing, an Pinkwashing Exposed, sorry. Um, Seattle Fights Back, which can be watched free online with English captions or subtitles and in subtitles in several other languages. Um, his newest book is Love in an Effed Up World: How to Build Relationships, Hook Up, and Raise Hell Together. And you can listen to his podcast as well. He has some amazing guest speakers too. You can find his information at deanspade.net, and we'll drop that in the chat. And thank you, Dean, for dropping your movie documentary link there too. So thank you. So with that, I pass it over to Dean. Thank you for being here and speaking for us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really, I really live for sharing radical ideas. That's what my life is about. That's, all the stuff I make is available for free online, including the mutual aid book if people are looking for it. It's in the Anarchist Library for free. And that documentary, the point of that documentary is for people to do their own community screenings. So just trying to like share ideas. So it's really exciting to be invited to a community like yours to, full of people who are facing crisis and wanting to support their neighbors and their loved ones and people that they don't know yet, to talk about my favorite ideas. So I'm going to share my screen. A couple access notes about my screen sharing. I mean, the main thing I'll say is, if anyone doesn't prefer to look at the screen, like I just like to show things because sometimes it helps people learn. But I don't think I'll actually be doing a lot of participation through the chat because it's a shorter presentation. But I will say aloud things that are relevant and tell what the images are. So if you're just in a position where you don't want to look, that's fine. Take breaks when you need to. All this information is online. Like I have given this presentation a lot or things like it. And maybe I'll ask Michelle if you put the link, if you don't mind putting the link in the chat. There's a page on my website that's a bunch of video workshops. If you want to go deeper into questions about like the details of problems that come up when people organize um, toward mutual aid, I have like a bunch of workshops that are for people trying it, like typical problems, things you can do, slides so you can do the workshop for yourself in your own group, like really trying to make this stuff easy. So Michelle will share that. Thank you so much. So I just want to start by showing just some images that people often associate with mutual aid. These first two images are images of food distribution in New York City in the early period of COVID. It's like people were doing all these huge food projects because some of them were grocery delivery projects for people who couldn't leave the house because they were immune compromised. Some of them were food distribution, just recognizing that so many people were out of work in so many different industries. And it was like for a lot of people, it was the first time they heard the word mutual aid was right around the beginning of COVID. It was like really big news, like, wow, people are doing so much coordinating. For many, many, many people, it was the first time they did something in their community to directly support others' survival. It was like a pretty big moment of people finding out what we can do for each other under difficult circumstances. So it's a very important time. A lot of people entered our movements then. And as you know, the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor uprising came right after COVID started, right? So that was like, just a few months later. And that was many people's first experience going into the streets and pushing back against police violence and racism. Obviously, there's like another big moment happening right now where many new people are joining our movement to fight back against ICE and support people who are targeted for detention and deportation. There's just, many people have been mobilized by recent disasters like hurricanes, floods, fires. So there's like these waves of mobilization happening. A few more images about what mutual aid is. So these are images of free food fridges that were from New York City that are particularly beautifully painted. But these, of course, happened all over the country, people creating free food fridges. Many at the beginning of COVID, many of them are still happening. These are images of a different kind of mutual aid. This is people doing street medic work, people who come to our communities, protests, and support people's health. So like there's an image in the corner of somebody getting treated for tear gas injury from the police. These street medics sometimes bring masks, they bring water, they bring bandages, they support our people who get injured by the police or counter protesters, and they make it more possible for us to be out there fighting back. They are sometimes medical professionals who are already trained, and sometimes they're people who are community trained. I think there's an interesting, juicy set of questions in thinking about mutual aid, about how much we tie ourselves to professionalism or need that, or how much we can redistribute skills and knowledge in our communities beyond professional networks that are more like regulated by the government. This is an image from 2020 when the uprising occurred. Maybe this news might have reached you. I live in Seattle, and in Seattle, there was a lot of fights between the cops and the people on the streets. And then the cops left the precinct in my neighborhood, and it became a police-free zone, the park right around there, the sidewalk. And this is what that looked like. This is what the sidewalk looked like right in front of there. And I include this because this is kind of typically what it looks like when our people take over space in our cities. Maybe some of you remember the Occupy Wall Street moment. Maybe that happened in the cities or towns you were living in, or you saw images of it on the news. And many other moments, the recent occupations of campuses to oppose genocide of Palestinians. Like when our people take up space, what we usually do is create a bunch of mutual aid tents. It'll be like free books, free food. When in Seattle in 2020, you could get a haircut, you could get your nails done, you could talk to somebody if you're having a mental health crisis because you'd experienced police violence. We give our communities, we support each other to survive. We do mutual aid work. And our movements don't really have like a welcome desk. Like if there is anything, it's mutual aid tents. Like I met a lot of people that summer who showed up to Seattle because they were like, oh, the revolution is happening there. I've never been involved in anything before. I want to be involved in opposing anti-Black violence and opposing the police. And they showed up and they just kind of go to like one of these tents. And that's actually their welcome to the movement. So it really matters that we are like there and being welcoming and helping people connect. A lot of people wanted to connect. They wanted to do something right away. They wanted to join a mutual aid project. They wanted to be somebody behind that table, or they wanted to join a big art build that was happening in the field of the park. Like people want to do stuff. Like when they're like, I'm pissed and I want to like care for others and fight back. And so mutual aid is like a vital on-ramp for most people, and often the first contact. Or they need something, so they encounter a mutual aid project, and that's where somebody says, you know what, yeah, it's messed up that you need that. We I think so too. We don't think it's your fault. You want to get involved in a tactic together to try to make it so that nobody faces these crises. These are images from the when there was the campfire in Northern California, I believe 2017 or 2018. People were living in the Walmart parking lot who had been displaced from their homes because their like whole town burned down. And this is very typical. You see these images during every kind of big disaster, climate-produced disaster like wildfires. People supporting each other with tents, blankets, clothes, people who've lost what they needed. You can see how smoky the air is in these images. Um, I think it's worth naming that people lived in the Walmart parking lot for a while, and then the cops like came and criminalized and forced everyone out. And this is very typical. Like this will be a theme in this presentation. Under racial capitalism, they can't stand the idea that we would provide for each other, that people would be trying to survive in public, that people would use public space, especially if they're poor people, people of color. And so you see that like oftentimes in disasters, like there'll be a small moment of toleration of people being outside or caring for each other, and then there'll be a crackdown. This is an image from Hurricane Hugo, people rescuing each other. We also know that the disaster systems in the United States are incredibly limited and flawed. They send in cops and National Guard to shoot people before they send in anybody to help you. Um, I hear constantly from people in the Gulf South that there's not really recovery. FEMA doesn't really do recovery, less and less every year. It doesn't even give people tarps half the time anymore. And I think about Hurricane Sandy that went up the East Coast. When was that? Maybe 2013 or something. FEMA offered people loans. It's like when you just lost your house, you don't actually want a loan. That's not actually helpful to have more debt, you know? And so neighbors rescue each other because we're the ones who are already there. And one of the big themes with mutual aid is that the more we're already doing mutual aid work, then the more we are ready when the disaster comes. An example I like to give about this is when Hurricane Sandy came through New York City, there's a group called CAV, that's Asian American group organizing in Chinatown for years and years and years before that. And so they are already organizing with elders living in all these tall buildings and stuff. They know a lot of people in the community. So when the hurricane comes through and the lights are out and the elevators don't work, FEMA doesn't know which buildings have elders on top floors, no water service, and can't get down to get food or water. CAV knows. The work we do in our communities before the disaster or with the ordinary everyday disasters that are already happening with poverty, racism, elders not having what they need, all the things that are just par for the course in our communities right now. When the next level disaster comes, we're more ready. We know where vulnerable people are. We know who's got resources. Oh, you know what? This person has a solar battery and they live on this block, and this person over here has a medical device. And if the lights go out, their medical device won't work, and we can connect these, so it's really vital. The mutual aid work we do prepares us for the coming disasters. And as I'm sure everybody here knows, the rest of our lives will be characterized by the ecocidal conditions, that have been produced by racial capitalism over the last decades. We're just going to keep seeing the temperatures rise, the fires, floods, storms, droughts, so we really need to figure out how to support each other, and we cannot rely on the government to do it. We can see that right now. I wanted to include this image. This is the Black Panther Party, one of its tactics, and a lot of other social movement groups during that period in the 60s and 70s did health clinics, right? That was like a really common tactic, was recognizing like the health disparities and lack of access to health care for Black people. And people did it in the women's movement, people did it in the Puerto Rican movement, and the Chicana movement, et cetera. And so these kinds of health clinics that were often in trailers. And some of these were also really complicated tactics that were very interesting, like sophisticated tactics, like putting a health clinic in a place that the government has cited to do some kind of project that's going to destroy a Black community. So trying to also use it as like a refusal and a block, a physical block to stop harmful infrastructure projects. Another example, historical example, needle exchange in the 1990s in Kingston, New York. Of course, needle exchange still exists. It's been more illegal at different points in the United States. And less illegal depending on where you live. But yeah, like helping people who are stigmatized as drug users and face enormous health consequences of not being able to access clean needles actually get access. And people have taken great risks to participate in needle exchange projects and make sure that that healthcare is available. I also wanted to include this project that really moved me when I heard about it in the South, Confess Project. This is a project based in the understanding that a lot of people, um, it started focused around Black men, but I think it's broader focus now. There's a lot of barriers to getting mental health services, to getting mental health support. Racism in the mental health system, fear of carceral, fear of being locked up if you go ask for help, et cetera, stigma, et cetera. So this project trains barbers and people who work in beauty shops to have basic mental health support skills because people come to the barber and they come to the beauty shop and they talk about their problems. And if the people who are working there, it's like much less of a hurdle to go talk to somebody at the barber shop or beauty shop than to go to try to find a therapist. Which, like, can I afford that? And will I be surveilled somehow? Will I risk losing my kids if people find out I'm having a hard time like this, et cetera? This is a very beautiful project to me. Again, this deprofessionalizing of the things our communities need and spreading them out to where we actually are. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what my kind of definition of mutual aid is, because obviously this term, it kind of did go mainstream and it's been used in lots of ways that don't match what I think. So I'm just telling you like how I think about it. So mutual aid, first of all, is if we imagine that we live in a social movement ecosystem where we do a lot of different stuff, we do big rallies and marches, we do pipeline blocking, encampments, we do lawsuits, we do so many different things. Mutual aid is the part of the work where we give each other material support to survive existing conditions, where we actually support people who are facing that kind of crisis with something they need right now: housing, healthcare, a ride to visit their loved one in prison, direct support to people in prison right now, people coming out, all of those kind of childcare, food, etc. And it's only mutual aid, in my view, if the work is based in a shared analysis about the root causes of this crisis. And that analysis is that it's not your fault you're in crisis, it's the fault of the systems. And this really matters because charity and social services often blame the individual person. They're like, you're unhoused, well, you should get sober and you should, take a parenting class and you should take a budgeting class. And like, there's an idea that there's something wrong with the person in crisis. Whereas mutual aid says there's something wrong with the system if anybody is unhoused. There's something wrong with the system of racial capitalism that concentrates wealth with a few people and makes most people struggle to pay rent. And where rents just get higher and higher. Wages get lower and lower. You all know you're living the same life. And it's only mutual aid, in my view, if it includes an invitation to collective action. So if we're giving out tents and water and letting people charge their phones in the park to support unhoused people, we're giving that stuff out, but we're also saying, hey, do you want to join our group? Do you want to join the protest at the landlord's house next week? Like, do you want to be part of this? Because we don't think it's going to be solved by just letting you charge your phone or giving you a tent. We know that to solve this, these are like deep structural problems. We need to build huge movements of people to fight back. So we're like inviting people, and you can absolutely charge your phone or have a bottle of water or a tent, even if you don't join us, but you are invited to join us. It's a really different framework about how change happens. It's change based on mobilization. So I want to distinguish mutual aid from charity. This is really huge. And I think it's particularly huge for communities of faith because a lot of the charity model actually has like origins, especially the US charity model has Christian European origins. And so part of that is a model in which people can get into heaven if they give money to the poor, that kind of stuff, and a model which looks down on poor people as sort of lesser and asks them to become moral in Christian terms. So there's lots of history in the US of like the US welfare systems being like only not it's only it starts as like only for the widows of people who've been in the U.S. military, and it's only for white women, and it's and you need to show you're not sexually active, and you can be investigated to make sure there's no man visiting your house. Like it's like very very heavy Christian stuff, and you see it today where a lot of social services stigmatize and shame queer and trans people or exclude us. And this is still with us. So in general, the charity model celebrates rich people and like you see this like, oh, isn't Bill Gates so amazing? He gave, this tiny amount of money to whatever, Jeff Bezos or whoever. It's like it's about aggrandizing them. And at the same time, it's about blaming and controlling people who are in crisis. So that, like I was saying, like you want to get on this housing list? Well, you need to show us that you're sober and you need to take these psychiatric meds and you need to go to all these appointments with the social worker. Instead of just like, you don't have a place to live. The most important thing is that you should have a place to live. Like, just, like, why do you have to be perfect before you get a place to live? Rich people don't. So this kind of focus on controlling poor people. And the charity model always divides um, people in crisis into those who are deserving and those who are undeserving. So it's like, oh, undocumented people can't get things here, or people who have felony convictions can't get things here, or people who can't prove an address, or people who do have kids, or people who don't have kids, or people who do have a history of drug use, or that kind of model. Which essentially what that model does is it says that the existing system is legitimate and that there's a few people who should get something who are like, oops, they shouldn't have been left out. But most people, well, they can just rot. Like it kind of says like it's okay that some people fall to the bottom because they're not as good, they're morally inferior, whatever. And all of this mutual aid rejects. Mutual aid, the framework is everything for everyone. There is enough on earth for everybody to have what they need, and everybody should. And everything besides that is an injustice. Like everybody should be housed and have food and all of that. And then we could still be like, oh, like I want to work on my relationship to drugs or I want to work on my whatever. But like, bottom line, everybody deserves everything they need to survive. Instead of we're going to pick people out. So there's a broader thing I want to mention here, which is that there's a mythology that we live under that tells us that social change is going to come from government, corporate media, and elites. Like we're going to like have some charismatic leaders who like change those elites' minds. They're going to do the perfect policy proposal or the perfect report or the perfect news article or documentary, and we're going to get the attention of those people, and that's going to change the minds of the elites, and they're going to fix things for us. And in that model of change, ordinary people have very little role. We got to vote, we can donate to nonprofits, maybe we can post on social media, go to an occasional march, but like mostly we're in a kind of passive role waiting for like nonprofits and policy, think tanks and elected officials, um, and maybe like celebrities and billionaires to fix things for us. And that is a model I want to disagree with. In the reality, social change only happens when huge numbers of ordinary people organize to fight back and to disrupt business as usual and to make it impossible for the extraction and violence to continue. This is the history of the world. I'm happy to like give people endless reading lists about this. I'm a professor and this is what I teach about and this is what I'm obsessed with studying. How does change happen? And it definitely doesn't happen by convincing your oppressor to stop. The thing is that injustice is actually not a result of misunderstanding. It's a result of domination. It's not like they don't know that jail is bad for people or that genocide kills children or that pollution destroys the planet. I mean, these people are planning to go to space. They're like, bye bye, Earth, And we're all here being like, this is actually the most beautiful place that we were evolved to live, and we want to live here together. And yeah, have that very different framework. So yeah, they're not going to be like convinced with like a good policy report. They know what they're doing. The other thing that's really important to me in like grounding our discussion of mutual aid is that the only thing we really have is our relationships to each other. Like our opponents have the money, the guns, like a lot of the infrastructure. They have nuclear weapons. They've got like some really intense stuff. And what we have is like all life on Earth. Like that is what is imperiled by what they're doing, which I think is like more than what they have. But it only works that way if we can move together, if we can treat each other well, if we can trust each other enough to try stuff, if we can care for one another, if we can become powerful through coordination and not be atomized and isolated the way they'd like us to be and turned against one another and, kind of incapable of organizing ourselves. So this is about organizing ourselves. It's about organizing in our own communities, to care for people and fight back. Those myths that I'm talking about are very demobilizing. They encourage us to kind of just stick to like passive or symbolic acts, like just vote or just like it's kind of like you're supposed to watch like Washington, D.C. politics like it's a soap opera and be like, ooh, what's going to happen next? And I'm just like, I don't really care about any of those people except for stopping them. How do we stop them? Those are my questions. Not, like it's not like a juicy soap opera. It's actually like a hideous colonial nightmare. Um, and we're encouraged to expect somebody else to save us. And, that's not that's not going to happen. And this kind of discourages us from doing the bold collective action we need to do, whether that is blocking the pipeline, whether that's distributing medications in our communities our own way. A lot of people in our communities are distributing trans healthcare because it's getting cut. They're just like, okay, we're going to make the medicines ourselves. We're going to hand it out. People are distributing abortion medication, like doing what needs to be done ourselves. We're not going to wait for people to do disaster prep in our community. The government's not going to show up and do it. We got to do it. The next flood, the next storm, the next freeze is coming, right? Like the next budget cuts. Like we need to coordinate to support our people. I just was in Glasgow, Scotland, and I met these people who have a phone service where LGBT elders can sign up and then you receive a call every week from somebody who's a volunteer in the community. So you don't have to call a helpline, you get this support. And they've had it for many years. Many people, like elders, have passed who've had these relationships. It's just like so beautiful to me. And then lots of people who can't leave the house for their own reasons or have other limits, they can participate as volunteers in it. Like there's just so many creative ways for us to think about who is not getting what they need and give it to each other. That's just like one small example, but I was really moved by it. Just to say a thing, that the mythology that I'm talking about, you can really see it in the story of the Montgomery bus boycott and the way that it's told in like elementary school, middle school, high school, that probably most of us heard if we were educated in the US. This story is told as if what happened was Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, and then Martin Luther King Jr. made speeches, and then justice prevailed. This is actually the story of a giant transportation mutual aid project coordinated by hundreds or thousands of working class Black women. They had to move tens of thousands of people to work around the city without the bus for 18 months. And when they're doing this, they don't know when this is going to end, right? I mean, it's like an unbelievably complex and beautiful mutual aid project. The woman on the left here is Georgia Gilmore. She was part of a group that did food projects where they made food and raised money to buy cars to drive people to their jobs. There was groups of people walking together because it wasn't safe, right? The like white racist people were like attacking people for participating in the boycott. And all these Black working class people have to go to these white neighborhoods that are far from where they live to do their jobs, in domestic service and whatnot. So it's just an example of how the stories we're told about how change work are not accurate and what changes when we find out how things really worked. If anyone's curious, there's a book that I absolutely love for thinking about how things really worked called In Defense of Looting. Maybe someone can put it in the chat, by Vicky Osterweil. She writes really, really readably. The stories are really juicy and inspiring, especially for these times we're living in now, about people doing like really bold, coordinated action. In Defense of Looting by Vicky Osterweil. I highly recommend the whole book. The whole section on slavery and enslaved people freeing themselves is amazing. Also, chapter 5 is one of the ones I really turn to in these times to think about huge groups of people coordinating and being unruly and taking care of each other and making major changes. Really, that book really helps me feel some sense of hope. I gotta include, of course, here the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program. It's one of the most famous mutual aid programs in U.S. history. People were distributing breakfast in their communities. And there's some really beautiful documentaries about it that where you hear people who were young Black people at the time whose families went to the breakfast program for breakfast, and there was this feeling of like it's so Black poverty is so stigmatized, and people going to this breakfast and getting the message from the party like actually our poverty is not our fault. It's an effect of white supremacy, and we can get together and fight back. And like that's the mutual aid at its best says, you know what, this isn't your fault. Join the fight. And the Black Panther Party's free breakfast program was so effective that, of course, the FBI declared it one of the biggest dangers to the U.S. government, and police all over the country raided the Black Panther Party offices and destroyed the food. So you can really see how threatening mutual aid is to the powers that be because they don't want us to be autonomous, to be caring for one another, and to be pointing out the reality in the situations we're living in. A few more pieces I want to say. I'm just check the time. Okay, just a few more things I want to say about. So we live in a system that has disaster relief like FEMA or poor relief like Social Security, disability benefits, welfare. Like, we have these different programs in the US government and also to some degree in our state governments, Medicaid, et cetera. And I just want to say a few things about them. One is that there can be a fantasy like, what if the US or what if Texas became a generous caregiving state? And like people spending their whole lives trying to fight to get that to happen. And I just want us to like, for me, it's really important to just hold that's not going to happen. The United States is a white settler colonial project. At best, it has given out small amounts of care in a very selective way, like even in its most generous moments, and usually mostly to try to control populations that were becoming unruly. So I just want like what would happen if we gave up the fantasy that the United States or the state we live in would become that and instead acted like it's the hostile thing that it is. That is like, and just really turn towards each other. That is like a deep question I have when the government gives out disaster or poverty relief, it is always conditional, like you can't get this unless you're sober, unless you're a citizen, blah, 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 exclusive and revocable, right? They sometimes make a slightly more generous project, like during COVID, they gave those checks and then they just take them back. And also, whenever they give stuff out, they give more of it to rich people than poor people, right? Maybe some people have read welfare history. There's a book called Regulating the Poor that looks at this very clearly that every time the US has expanded welfare, like in the 1930s and in the 1960s and 70s, it was always a project to try to control uprisings that were happening of poor people. It was never actually a project of redistribution and fairness, and then it always gets revoked as soon as the danger of revolution is off the table. So just remembering like when it's in their hands, it's just a method of control, and it's also always been super racist and sexist. People ask me when I present about mutual aid or when they read the book, but how do we ever get to scale if we're all doing these little local community projects, Dean? The answer to this is a different model of scale. So the model of scale people are thinking of is like, oh, it'd be so much easier if the government just, redistributed everything. Because they already are this giant centralized, whether it's state, city, or federal, they're already these giant centralized mechanisms that already tax us, and then they should give it out better instead of giving it all to the military and the cops or whatever. As I said, I don't think that's going to happen, right? Like that, the direction it's been going my entire life, and likely yours, is only in the other direction, towards more money for the police and military, less money for everything for poor people, old people, people with disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not going in that direction. So we really need to handle it like it's not. And the other thing is that centralizing things is a project of domination. What we really want, what all the research shows about disaster and crisis, is that the best responses are the most local responses for the reasons I described before about who knows who in the neighborhood has what. And, oh, we're doing it in Spanish over here. Oh, we're doing it recognizing that people are in a Muslim community over here and have these norms and it'll be better this way for them. We're doing it over here supporting LGBT people and have these needs. Like, it's like the more local, the better. And so what we're talking about with scale instead is not a top-down scale, but a bottom-up scale. What if we had hundreds and hundreds of mutual aid projects in every community that were networked and autonomous from each other, but sharing resources, sharing wisdom across regions. And we were like, we had, childcare projects and accompany elders to doctor's appointments projects and support projects for people with disabilities and, projects giving out clean needles and everything else you can imagine. That is the kind of scale we're talking about. And so what you do in your community matters. It doesn't just matter if it happens in DC or in the state capitol or even in City Hall. Actually, most of that stuff goes nowhere, right? Most of it becomes just symbolic. Like if we win, they're like, they say something nice about gay people on some bill and nothing changes in gay people's lives. That's what I've seen my whole life, right? Or they say that the cops are now anti-racist, that the cops go on killing people of color as they have done. So I'm asking you all to reimagine something with me about this, and I'm happy to talk more about that during Q&A if it's useful. This doesn't mean I don't want to acknowledge that sometimes the government gives us concessions, and we can celebrate those, right? So, like the Black Panther Party did the free breakfast program, and the USDA created the school lunch program, literally because of the threat of the Black Panther Party giving out breakfast. They were like, the legitimacy of the US government was threatened, and they gave out the lunches. We can be like, right on, that's an indicator of how powerful the Black Panther Party's tactic was, but that doesn't mean we're going to then trust the USDA to handle the racism in food. Nope, they are still, it's still a racist food system. So how can we acknowledge concessions without stopping our fight? And I just say all this because the stakes are so exceptionally high right now. It is, it's life and death, and it's just going to get so much harder during the next years. Okay, I'm going to try to stop soon. A couple more points. Mutual aid principles that are important that I want to mention. I mentioned this already. The system, not the people suffering under it, is what creates poverty, crisis, and vulnerability. There's a commitment to dignity and self-determination of people in crisis. So not telling people what they need, but actually listening to what they say they need. Doing projects that have long-term commitments. It's not like, oh, I showed up at the food bank just on Thanksgiving and took a selfie and was like, look, I've done my thing for the year. Instead, it's like, oh, we showed up every day outside the jail and supported people coming out of the jail. And as we did the work, we figured out, oh my God, we need to have people who speak Spanish with us. Oh, wow. We need to have referrals for people who are seeking housing. We need, and we got better and better at it and learned more and more about the system and what it's doing to our people. It's vital for mutual aid projects to have open pathways for new people, especially because otherwise, often like a small group of people start something, then like burn out, or people move, or people get sick, and they never figure out ways for new people to really join meaningfully. If you're interested in that, I have some workshops about that in the link that Michelle posted earlier. I'm going to just skip forward a little bit. There's so much here, but I want to finish on this fun note. Mutual aid includes rule breaking and law breaking. I love this image. Stop believing in authority, start believing in each other. This is like my favorite slogan. Um, Maybe some of you know about Jane, 1970s college students at University of Chicago who started providing abortions. At first, they worked with doctors to provide illegal abortions to people, and then they were like, "These doctors suck and are, expensive. We're just going to do it ourselves out of the back of a van." So a lot of times in this, I think this is inspiration to a lot of people right now in this period of attacks on reproductive health care. Another example, these are people blocking sanitation trucks in Echo Park in Los Angeles in 2020. These trucks are coming to clear out homeless encampments. These people successfully blocked these trucks for months. There was a really thriving homeless encampment in Echo Park for many, many, many months. And then in 2021, the city of Los Angeles spent millions of dollars clearing out the homeless people, and thousands of people showed up to stop this raid. It didn't work. City of Los Angeles erected a 16-mile fence all the way around the park. I think this tells us a lot, again, about the stakes of mutual aid and how much the government will do to stop us from caring for each other and stop poor people from existing in public. I love this image from Tennessee from 2017. We're seeing a lot more things like this now, but neighbors surrounding the van of this man. ICE had come to arrest him, and the neighbors surrounded him until the ICE folks left. Such a beautiful example. And this other example, Moms for Housing in Oakland. These Black moms took over vacant housing and were squatting it with their kids. Their supporters outside all night trying to guard them. These are the cops they sent to evict them. I just want to notice how militarized the state response is to people trying to care for each other and get their needs met. I love this image. I'm finishing this by Seth Bachman. The government does not care. We, the people, must help each other. This image is really an emblem for me of the state we're in, and I would love to take questions.
Thank you so much for that, Dean. If folks can please post their questions in the chat. Um, we can also, for those that are individual, if you want to raise your hand, we can also open up, unmute you so you can ask your question if that is easier for you. Um, but I do want folks to take full this opportunity to get to ask Dean questions directly.
Yeah, there's one in the chat that I see about citing a successful example of mutual aid that was sustained over time. Oh, there's so many. Okay, let me think about this. Well, one thing that's really, really, really ongoing is, I'm part of the movement to abolish prisons and police. And in that movement, there's so much mutual aid directly supporting people inside prisons. So there's tons of like very long-term prison letter writing projects that connect people on the outside with people on the inside. And then there's also like tons of really long-term projects, people going inside prisons and doing education, because people, inside prisons like really, really want to engage with people outside and like get to chances to learn and to develop themselves because they're like living in a cage, which is just like so awful. So those are like, also there's a huge long-term support for political prisoners, specific projects like that. I mean, one project actually I'll name that Michelle and I were talking about this earlier. Maybe some of you know Jason Leiden, who's a UU minister, Reverend Jason Leiden, and Jason founded Black and Pink, which is one of the oldest um, LGBT prisoner pen pal programs in the US. There's chapters all over the country. People write back and forth with LGBT prisoners. It's like literally life and death for people to get those letters and to form relationships on the outside. Then when people are released, they have a friend outside who can help them with planning so they aren't released back into like homelessness or immediately being reincarcerated. I've helped multiple people transition out of prison who I met through Black and Pink over the years and wrote with for decades sometimes before they were released. It's just like so, yeah. I mean, there's examples in every community. I mean, community food projects. There's just like there's so much, that people are doing. But I think that those examples from the abolition movement are really moving for me.
To see, how do you handle or recommend approaching a group with differing priorities or desires within mutual aid organizing? And that comes from Ames Kendrick.
Thanks, Ames. Yeah, so the question of priorities comes up in every group, right? Like, I think that most mutual aid groups want to prioritize people in the greatest crisis. And it's kind of just an ethical thing. It's like if I walk into a hospital waiting room and somebody's bleeding out and somebody else has a small cut, we're going to start with the person who's bleeding out. So I think a lot of mutual aid groups gravitate towards working with unhoused people, working with people who are facing deportation, working with people who are facing criminalization, facing poverty, like that kind of stuff. And it's like every group is trying to just do what it can. And sometimes groups get into conflicts inside a group, right? Like we're in a mutual aid group. Let's say we've been raising money in our community during early COVID for people in crisis. And we've raised $20,000 and we've got a request from somebody who needs $20,000 for a new wheelchair that they really need. Or we could potentially give it to multiple people. What should we do? Like there's not a good answer to that. That is just really, 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 really hard. And so I work with a lot of groups to talk about how sometimes we get in fights in our groups with each other when really it's the conditions. So how can we recognize something is the conditions, and not go at each other's throats? And also I recommend sometimes in groups, like if Michelle's got a certain set of priorities and I've got another set and we're in a group together, do both. Like get more people in the group or even make two groups, like just trying to move away from assuming that different priorities have to be at odds or a scarcity model. Instead, just like try more stuff. We actually need more stuff tried all the time. And I think, being direct with each other, like, oh, I think this group is, if you're in a group and you feel like they're doing the work in a way that ignores people with disabilities or that's leaving out immigrants, like tell each other. Like, of course, in all of our organizing, we are looking to be permeable to feedback and to give our feedback freely. Like we want it like in a loving way. Like, if me and Michelle in our group, it's like, I want to say like, Michelle, I see your commitment to this work. And I want to share with you a thought I'm having about how we can be more aligned or how something that you said or did didn't work for me. And I'm investing in our relationship. And I don't need to be afraid to share this with you, and you don't need to be afraid to hear it. These are skills we don't have right now, but I think these are skills that we're all trying to build. I have some workshops about giving and receiving feedback at that link that Michelle shared that might be useful. I recommend groups actually have even a 20-minute conversation about giving and receiving direct feedback so that we can start to build a different culture than the culture of conflict avoidance that causes actually worse conflicts in our groups.
I we have one from Nathaniel Bass regarding different, less densely populated areas. Texas is huge. Nathaniel, I apologize. I'm not sure if you're in Texas or outside of Texas, but they are in more less populated area. So what's the difference between effective and mutual aid in urban communities versus rural communities?
I'm seeing a lot of kind of similar things in places, right? So, like in a lot of places, in rural places in Washington State where I live, there's people doing work supporting folks living in cars and trucks, and those people being cleared out a lot. Or, like, I heard about a really cool project in North Carolina where people were doing a lot of mutual aid in a trailer park where there's a lot of undocumented people living, and one of the biggest issues is people having their cars towed. So they started doing it like that, and that was like actually messing up people's lives super bad because like you lose your car, you can't afford to get it back. They're doing a whole project around like dealing with making parking more possible for people. Actually, it was like life and death, and then it became organizing also around supporting people with rapid response around ICE and like or like also I've heard about in North Carolina also people reporting roadblocks to each other using social media or other channels so that people can avoid roadblocks and not run into ICE. Like that's because people are driving, right? I think, people doing food projects in rural areas very similar. Like I think it's, the logistics can be a bit different, but the needs are kind of the same. Or like I'm also thinking about people doing a lot of landlord tenant stuff in rural areas in Washington, just like helping people know how to defend themselves from eviction because that's an issue. I mean, it seems like rents are up everywhere, rural and urban in the United States that I hear about. So I think that there's much that can be transferred between. There's a bunch of different, I think if you Googled rural organizing project and then an issue like housing or immigration or whatever, you find like cool models all around the country, depending on what you want to work on, like what you see. The question is always like in my own community, what are people seeming organizable about? Like, what are people kind of fired up about or struggling with? And then sometimes doing something like, like going, around a trailer park um, or to a food bank or somewhere and like having a flyer and being like, is anyone interested in doing a go bag party or some kind of other disaster prep thing? Or is anyone interested in like tenants' rights or, just trying to like put out feelers and like sometimes we have to try several things. And part of how we like try stuff and that's how we get people are it turns out people actually feel isolated and want something social, so we're going to offer a spaghetti dinner or we're going to offer we're going to show documentaries at this library or like it's just like building connection can often lead to knowing what we're going to do together to like care for each other and fight back.
And we have so with the two types of crises, like ongoing crisis with homelessness and hunger, and acute crises like natural disasters, is the mutual aid approach the same, or what are some differences in those situations?
Yeah, that's super interesting because it's like I think my aim always is to have us get more and more people doing the work around the ongoing crises, our folks in jails and prisons, the hunger, the homelessness, the ICE enforcement. And then in moments when there's an acute crisis, you actually get more interest sometimes. Like a bunch of new people are like, oh, I want to join a project to help with that. So if we're ready, if we actually know how to build groups, if we know how to take in people's interest and actually orient them, like something a lot of groups struggle with is like, how do we orient new members? How do we make them have meaningful roles in the group and understand how decisions are made and be able to be part of things and co-steward the work? And how do we develop people to have new solidarities and to like grow as organizers and become leaders in their communities? If you're already doing that in the ongoing work, then when the crisis strikes, you've got a bit of a template. You've got a bunch of people who know how to facilitate meetings. You've got existing methods for, oh, we actually already have a disability justice training we roll out to new people, or we actually do a feedback training with new people, or we know how to create good group culture. Like, so to me, all of our work all the time is also supporting us for the next crisis.
And probably have time for one more question. I'm actually gonna, there's two questions that are a little bit similar. There's one about government and one about nonprofit. So knowing government is a non-human entity, but it is made up of humans doing the work, how do we deal within that? And then with nonprofits, can mutual aid work in partnership with existing nonprofits?
Those are great questions. Yes, it's true that government is made up of humans. What's hard is that um, they will replace humans who go out of line. So it's like in some ways when people are in that job, even everybody has a heart and mind, etc. When we become too focused on those people, I think we miss opportunities to actually change structures or like build autonomous structures because those people will be replaced or they'll be neutralized. Like there's a lot of push in like where I live in Seattle to like have socialist city council members, but it's never made a real difference to have a couple of socialist city council members. I'll say like it's like the police system just gets bigger and bigger. And you might think Seattle, it's in a blue state. No, it's just like the same BS everywhere, to be honest with you all. It's amazing how consistent, no matter where I've lived, what the city governments are actually doing is. So I just think it's like how, in the same way that like I don't believe in doing work to try to train police to make them do policing better. It does not work. Like if there are police, they will do racist violence. You cannot train them not to. That's just like everything has shown us that for at least 50 years. And there's been always an effort to expand policing by like now they're going to make it fair by hiring more of them. So I really want to have us like when someone's in a role like that, they're not really a person, they're a role. And we need to recognize the role and not be kind of misled by the like fact that they are a person. Of course they're a person, but like we need to, in my opinion, like attack the systems and not get like lost and being like, you see this a lot with students being told to like, oh, but the new president of the university is friendly and you can call her by her first name. It's like, this is actually a distraction. So I think that's really complicated to hold. Like, of course, I love all people and I hate all governments. I'm not for anybody on either side of any war. I'm for all the people who live underneath those governments because they're all being dominated by those governments. So I've got a big view on that one. And then, yeah, nonprofits is great. This is a great piece of it too. It's kind of there's some similarities, right? Because the nonprofit system itself was created to be a buffer zone to maintain racial capitalism. So it's supposed to give out little bits of charity essentially, or appear to do small reforms. And they're incredibly limited because nonprofits are funded by government or philanthropists, rich people. So if you're being funded by your opponents, it's not going to be a radical project. It's going to have a lot of limits, and it's usually going to be also like it's about having a few professionals do it and most of us do nothing. Of course, I've worked in nonprofits my entire life. Most of us, I'm sure many people here work in nonprofits and don't have that view. But when you're working in there, you can feel it. You can feel these limits it puts on your work. So my view is like when we're doing mutual aid in our communities, we can absolutely like figure out ways. Sometimes you collaborate with somebody in government or somebody in a nonprofit. You never collaborate with the police ever. But you know what it is, you know the nature of it. And you're like, okay, is this co-opting us? Is this changing who's eligible for the support here? Are they trying to change our message? Like we want to lead. The most radical, meaningful work we do will be autonomous. It will be unpaid for our entire lives. So that's the work where the real heart of the matter is. And nonprofits, if they're good, should follow those people, should not be dragging them down and diluting their message and shutting them up and telling them to keep certain people out of it. And this is really hard. And when we are the ones working on nonprofits, we need to be like agents of change. We need to be like, I'm in here, but I'm not of it. I am of the movement, and I temporarily have this job. Same way teachers, nurses, like I'm in here and there's an unfair rule. I'm going to break this rule to get somebody what they need. I'm not going to be taken by this system to be a feature of the system. We want to be, especially under fascism, we are not rule followers. We are interested in everything for everyone, not in sustaining the systems themselves. And so that's the kind of careful way to work with nonprofits or with jobs like teaching, nursing, like anything that's like in the helping professions, you know? It's like, of course we're there because we're people who love other people, but we have to be there with this very like cautious, discerning, thoughtful, organizing mind.
Well, thank you so much, Dean. I wish we could take all of these questions. There's a lot, but I will say that I see some questions there, such as the ones about burnout, and about recommending like how to get connected with mutual aid organizations, as well as like how to start mutual aid in a cohesive solidarity action that can be answered at Dean's website with all the amazing videos and resources. We got deanspade.net. I'll drop it into but we'll be sending out an email with the recording and have links in there as well. So let's just give a big thanks to Dean for being with us today and for helping us learn more about how to take good care of each other, how to show up for each other, and knowing that, the only way to really thrive is by having each other's backs. So thank you so much, Dean. So
Thank you
good
for
to have
organizing, Michelle. So grateful to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be, again, thank you to Dean, thank you to Reverend Carey, thank you to Taylor and to Ethan for helping us out today. Um, I did also want to thank you all for being here, for spending your afternoon with us. Thank you to those that are hosting in-person events and are going to continue the conversation. Whenever we're talking about natural disasters versus other, continuous mutual aid, one of the things that prompted us to ask you to come speak, Dean, was that whenever we had the floods in Central Texas and there were um, so many people lost their lives, but also ICE showed up and started picking up folks. And we were asked to help mobilize to help out immigrant communities in that space. And we struggled to be able to give the help that was needed. Thankfully, others were ready to do that. So part of the discussion afterwards is going to be some asset mapping. What resources do our congregations have? Where are the gaps? Where can we help each other out? So I hope folks will stick around at if you're in a group to be able to have that conversation.
That's
Um,
brilliant.
thank, yeah, yeah. Thank you to Bay Area UU for sponsoring today, and thank you to First Houston for having me here. And I'll be helping to lead one of those discussions here in person. So, with that, Carrie, would you like to extinguish the chalice?
Sure will. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of commitment. We'll hold these into our heart until we are together again. Thank you all.
Thanks, Carrie. And again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your presence. For taking this information and learning with us and being able to take it back out to your communities. Um, Thank you for those that were able to donate. If you would like to continue supporting the programming that we do at TXUU Justice Ministry and the work that we're doing in solidarity with a lot of our frontline partners, a lot of those that are most impacted with what's going on in our systems, please feel free to go to TXUUJM.org and there is a spot there to donate if you would like to support financially. So thank you again, and we will please reach out if you have any questions or anything that we can help in supporting the work that you're doing in your communities. Thanks again. Goodbye.